Hey everybody, now we are standing at the site in Miller's famous cornfield at Antietam. The north woods are over my right shoulder, the east woods are over my left shoulder, and the west woods are directly behind Chris White, who is behind the camera here. We're going to talk a little bit about the cornfield fighting, sometimes known as the first phase, maybe from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. No standardized time during the Civil War, so you could take your best guess. We're standing on the farm of not only in the cornfield, but on the farm of David R. Miller. We'll hopefully shoot a separate video about that, but he comes from a very wealthy family, and he's going to own a lot of land around here, but he was just trying to work his land and live his life, and then the armies come and forever change, especially the Miller farm, turning his cornfield into the cornfield, okay? And there's going to be some terrible fighting here, first with the 1st Corps going against 2 Confederate divisions on the other side, then with Confederate reinforcements coming up. You've heard of them, Hood soldiers, maybe some of D.H. Hill's soldiers, and then the Union 12th Corps coming up, okay? And it's going to devolve into the bloodiest fighting at the Battle of Antietam or the Battle of Sharpsburg. Now, before I turn it over to Brian Baracz, who's a historian and a ranger here at Antietam, let me just say that you've probably already heard the sad news of the passing of Ed Bars 2 days ago at the age of 97. Please know that while we're out here on the anniversary, that we're thinking about him. Several of us have been in this cornfield with Ed before, and I don't like to speak for anybody else, but I am sure he would want us to continue this coverage and keep talking about American history. In fact, I think he would consider it our duty to do so. So with no further ado, let's bring it on over to Brian Baracz, who can summarize the battle for the cornfield.
Once again, good morning. So, first shots of the battle are fired in the direction behind me here. You have the Moomaw Farm and Moomaw Cemetery, and there's a scattering of shots before the sun rose up over South Mountain. And it's kind of that noise that alerted the Union High Command over here in the North Woods to start moving forward. So the first group of Union troops to move through the cornfield, Abram Duryea's men from Pennsylvania and New York, 1,200 soldiers. And they pushed straight here to the south edge of this cornfield. The battle line stretched almost the entire length of the cornfield. When they reached that south edge, they ran into Georgians commanded by Marcellus Douglas. The bloodiest day in American history began to unfold. Along that fence line, Duryea lost 33% of his men in the first 30 minutes of the fight. And as Duryea moved back and retreated through the corn, 2 more Union brigades moved up through the area. Over here to the west of us, John Gibbon and the famous Iron Brigade. Over here to the east, George Hartsuff's men from Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, as well as New York. By that point, Confederate reinforcements started to arrive on the battlefield. Harry Hayes' men moved through this area right behind me. You can see the cars out there in the distance. Those cars are kind of in the no man's land between soldiers from Louisiana and the 12th and 13th Massachusetts. And while that fighting is going on along the Hagerstown Turnpike, the 19th Indiana, the 7th Wisconsin moved on the other side of the pike, past the telephone poles, to confront Confederate soldiers down along the rock ledge. Right through this area, the 2nd Wisconsin as well as the 6th Wisconsin pushed through the corn. And on the other side of the corn, they encountered William Stark's soldiers. William Stark, the 1st general, mortally wounded here at the battle. There were a total of 6. 3 from the north and 3 from the south. 1 from each side in each area, main area of the field. Along the Hagerstown Turnpike, as the Iron Brigade started to gain some ground and push towards the church, they had flushed Douglas's men back south towards the high ground where the visitor center stands today. They had pushed Stark's Louisianans from along the Hagerstown Turnpike south as well. Gibbon's men pushed through the corn and advanced towards the church. At that point, another Confederate counterattack started to unfold. John Bell Hood's division pushed out from behind the Dunkard Church, which is just about a half mile to the south of us. You could take Hood's division and break it into 2 groups, 2 brigades. The 1st Brigade, commanded by Evander Law, pushed more across this area towards the East Woods. The other brigade, known as the Texas Brigade, advanced directly towards where we are standing. But as that brigade got to the area just south of the cornfield, that line started to break up. One of the Texas regiments, the 5th Texas, was ordered to help Evander Law over here in the East Woods. The 4th Texas, 18th Georgia, Hampton Legion, they pulled over into this section of the corn along the Hagerstown Turnpike. Final regiment, the 1st Texas, 211 soldiers. They advanced pretty much right over the ground that we're standing on right now, and they made their way to within about 30 paces of the north edge of the cornfield. When they got to that point, Pennsylvania reserves, the 11th, the 12th, the 9th, more kind of reserve units to be pushed into the fight. They were waiting along that northern edge of the cornfield, and they fired a volley into the 1st Texas. 13 color bearers were shot down in that volley. The 1st Texas retreated. Meanwhile, over on this eastern part of the cornfield, the Evander Law's men, the 2nd and the 11th Mississippi, they had pushed over that north edge of the cornfield, and they were hitting the flank, and they started to retreat. And so the kind of this ebb and flow, the back and forth. In the end, all said and done, the cornfield changed hands 6 times. But at any rate, as these Confederates fell out of the corn and headed back towards the high ground you can see behind me, Confederate reinforcements under the command of D.H. Hill, D.H. Hill's division. These troops started the day. Roswell Ripley's men down around the Moomaw farm. They pushed over the hill in the distance in this direction. They were forced back by the Union 12th Corps. More Confederate reinforcements come up. Alfred Colquitt's men, soldiers from Georgia. They were the last Confederates to hold the cornfield, and their battle line started behind me here, right where this tree is located, and it ran diagonally, pretty much right across where we're standing, out in this direction here, towards that northeast part of the cornfield. And holding that end of the line was the 6th Georgia, the 6th Georgia. Now, meanwhile, the Union 1st Corps had been used up. And at that point, right around 7:30 in the morning, the Union 12th Corps appeared on the battlefield. Joseph Mansfield, the first time he's commanding soldiers in the battlefield, as he's trying to bring these old regiments, veteran regiments, in and to help with the new regiments. Mansfield's mortally wounded. 2nd General mortally wounded on the morning of the battle. And that sends the 12th Corps into confusion. 12th Corps numbered about 7,200 men. Breaking that 12th Corps down, Williams' division, Alpheus Williams, he's the one that hit those Mississippians and drove them from the corn. And he's the one that hit Roswell Ripley and drove them back through the corn. Williams' men are fighting kind of in this section, the center and kind of the west part of the cornfield. Over in that northeast corner, we left off with the 6th Georgia. They were about to be hit by George Greene's division. Greene's men, as well as the rest of the 12th Corps, started the morning on the George Line farm about a mile out to the northeast of us. And as those men were making their way to the field, they had crossed through some woodlots and through a narrow cornfield. They crossed over Joseph Poffenberger's farm lane, and then they had moved into the East Woods. And just as they got to the edge of the East Woods, there was a heavy fog covering the field when the day unfolded. Add to that the smoke from the weapons. The commander in one of the Ohio regiments, Eugene Powell, he said that mist and fog rendered everything obscure and uncertain, but peering through that cloud of vapor, I noticed a line of the enemy standing at and just beyond a rail fence. He gave the order to fire. But no sooner did he give that command, the soldier commanding the regiment next to him, Orrin Crane, said, "No, wait, don't fire into those men. Those are our own soldiers." So at this pivotal point of the battle, these two guys from the Buckeye State are out there arguing whether or not to fire 40 yards away. Well, Eugene Powell went out in the argument. Again, he gave the order to fire, and they fired almost point-blank range into the men from the 6th Georgia. And by that point, another Union regiment had arrived on the flank of the 6th Georgia, the 28th Pennsylvania. Alfred Colquitt, the Confederate commander of this brigade, said that we were exposed to a fire from all sides and nearly surrounded. The enemy closed in upon our right so near that the ranks were scarcely distinguishable. Heavy hand-to-hand fighting broke out in that northeast part of the cornfield, men using their bayonet. If they didn't have a bayonet, they're using their musket to strike down their opponent. 6th Georgia was unable to hold that position, and they fell back. And then the next regiment down, 23rd Georgia, 27th Georgia, 28th Georgia, 13th Alabama. They just all tumble out of the cornfield back towards the Dunkard Church. Eugene Powell said, "The line at the fence where the enemy was standing when we gave our first fire was awful beyond definition. Dead men were literally piled upon and across each other." And at that point, Confederate soldiers vacate the cornfield, head back towards the church. At that point, there were no Confederate forces on this part of the battlefield. From the Hagerstown Turnpike east, from the Sunken Road north, no Confederate forces. Greene's men advanced through the cornfield, pushed towards the south, and drove off S.D. Lee's 19 guns. They were up on the high ground. It was Greene's advance, as well as the long-range Union artillery on the other side of the Antietam Creek, that drove those artillery pieces from that high ground. Greene eventually made his way into the little swale just south, or I should say just east of the visitor center. And at that point, there was a lull on the battlefield. And by that point, close to 6,000 casualties covered this square mile of land. Again, that's right about 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to throw it back over to Garry.
Thanks, Brian. You know, we were discussing who's going to do the summary of the cornfield. I'm glad we settled upon Brian. That was great. Thank you so much. So, you know, what we just talked about was what some historians have called 4 hours of continual slaughter. Every second or two in this fighting, you have a soldier falling, killed, or wounded during that time. And we're going to kind of do a little hodgepodge now with Doug Ullman and Tim Smith coming back up. But I want to point out a couple of things. One, these things are all connected, right? When the 12th Corps advanced with Williams over here and Greene over there, it provided sort of an opening for a division of the 2nd Corps to advance between them. That is going to open up. That is going to be the Union advance into the West Woods that we'll talk about separately. When Brian talked about 3 of the brigades of D.H. Hill, he had 5. He brought 3 up here into the fight. They got roughly handled. That left D.H. Hill with only 2 brigades. Those are the 2 brigades that actually are going to defend the sunken road. So to study a battle, I really recommend it. Tim told me this about 30 years ago. Study the order of battle by brigades and things start to fall into place. Lastly, before I turn it over to Tim or Doug, whoever wants to come up, I just want to point out in the distance that most of the Confederate line early in the fight is not right along the road, which was not here during the battle or in the corn, but a lot of it was in the stubble field that was right beyond the road. That is the land, the 44 acres that you, the members and supporters of this organization, as well as our partners, were able to preserve about 5 years ago. We call it the epicenter, and it is now happily, after being, you know, really well preserved and with the barn taken down and some trees taken down by the Save Historic Antietam Foundation, and with trees planted, the new Eastwoods trees growing from the Maryland Highway Administration, is where it has all been now turned over to the stewardship of the National Park Service, right where it belongs. So thank you to everybody for this incredible effort on all that land you're seeing just beyond the road. So Tim, Doug, fight your way up here. It looks like Doug's coming first. Doug Ullman, formerly of the Civil War Trust.
So when we think about the Civil War, when we think about Antietam, we think about all of these great West Pointers, these professionally trained officers who are fighting this battle. Well, the first general officer to advance Union troops through this field is not a trained soldier. He is a merchant from New York City named Abram Duryea. Duryea he serves in the New York militia in the 1830s and 1840s and 1850s as part of putting down the Dead Rabbits riot, as well as the Astor Place riots. So he's got a military experience in that respect, and that using the militia as sort of a police force. But he has only just begun to command troops in the field when the Civil War begins. He's going to raise the famous 5th New York Zouaves, who have just been destroyed at the Battle of Second Manassas. And then he will eventually take command of this brigade of the Union 1st Corps. And they're going to be the first ones to come through this cornfield and then meet the Confederates on the other side of that fence.
You know, we talk a lot about casualties during the Civil War and some of these horrific battles like Gettysburg or Antietam. Most of the units that were involved in the action we're discussing here for the Northern Army have regimental histories that cover the action on a regimental level in this area of the cornfield. One of the most interesting units here is the 12th Massachusetts Infantry. They're organized in Boston. You might say there's a lot of blue bloods in the regiment. And this unit, I believe, had 334 men in the action here, and they lost 224 of their men. They have the distinction of having the highest percentage loss of a Northern regiment in the Battle of Antietam that day. And they moved through the corn and fought against the Southerners at the south edge of the cornfield before being driven out. One of the interesting things about the fight is the undulating ground and the lack of open spaces. The cornfield they can't see through, and a lot of the units are a lot closer to the unit they're firing into than at other battles that are fought in big open spaces where everybody can see a good distance. And because they're so close, the percentage of casualties is a lot greater than we're used to. The 1st Texas charging into the Union 1st Army Corps suffered like 80% losses in the Battle of Antietam. But one of the more interesting casualties that people talk about in morning fighting is a Newfoundland dog. And according to the Service with the 6th by Rufus Dawes, he says, at the very farthest point of the advance on the turnpike, Captain Werner von Batschel, commanding Company F, was shot dead. Captain Batschel was an excellent officer of the French army. Brought up as a soldier in a Napoleonic school, he was thoroughly imbued with the doctrine of fatalism. His soldierly qualities commanded the respect of all, and his loss was deeply felt in the regiment. Batchel had a fine Newfoundland dog, which had been trained to perform military salutes and many other remarkable things. In the camp, on the march, and in line of battle, this dog was his constant companion. The dog was by his side when he fell. Our line of men abandoned the body when they retreated, but the dog stayed with his master and was found on the morning of the 19th of September, laying dead upon his body. We buried him with his master. So far as we know, no family or friends mourned for the poor Batchel, and it's probably that he was joined in death by his most devoted friend on earth. I think today, Captain Batchel's buried in the Antietam National Cemetery, and I often wonder if they move the body of the dog when they move the body of the soldier.
And while we're talking about the units that fought here, first of all, that's, anytime we talk about dogs on battlefields, like got a little bit, that's just, I don't know why that's super sad to me, but it is. I want to, draw attention to the fact that the troops that are fighting here in the Cornfield are still relatively new to the Army. These are men from the old Army of Virginia who have fought at First Manassas. Some of them fought at Cedar Mountain, and that's really their first combat experience has only been in the last month or so, and now here they are in one of the bloodiest parts of the bloodiest battlefield in American history up until that time. And this is something that I'd like to bring people's attention to, because we're going to talk about veteran troops that people have heard of before. We're going to talk about the 2nd Corps, we'll talk about Sedgwick's Division, the Irish Brigade, all of those famous units. They're actually the freshest units to fight in this battle. It's the men from the 1st Corps who have had experience as recently as South Mountain just a few days ago, and they're going to be the ones kicking off the fight here in the Cornfield.
Good, and I think Doug brings up a good point here that, it's easy, at least people like me, to talk about, the fighting and how the regiments and the brigades went in and what the casualty figures were. But each one of these, people in the regiments are people, okay? And they have pets and they have cares at home and whatnot. And that's why seeing a dead horse or seeing a dog really brings things home for so many of us. And maybe to bring a little bit more to that, I'm going to bring on Brian Cheeseboro, because, we talk about, I always think that D.H. Hill is always angry. And I always sort of think that Hood's Texans are always angry. Well, on this day, they are known to be very angry. Why? Not necessarily because of the fighting. Brian?
Well, thanks, Gary. Well, they were actually what we call hangry, which is a term I've heard more recently, because they were held in reserve. And they were told that you can go ahead. They hadn't eaten for 3 days, okay? They hadn't eaten for 3 days, and they were told, hey, you guys can chill. Go ahead and get your breakfast. We'll call you if we need you, but Lee gave the order that as soon as we need you, you got to move. So that's the thing, too, that Lee was shifting troops all day long. He had a lot fewer troops than McClellan did. So when the order came, these guys were right in the middle of getting their breakfast ready. You can imagine what it'd be like if you wake up, you get your breakfast, or you want to get your breakfast, and you don't get it, and then you have to go to work, and imagine how upset you'd be. So that was pretty much their situation. So when they're attacking in the Cornfield, they're mad as hornets, and now you understand why.
That's exactly it, and we'll tie it up with that. Whenever I talk about Hood's Division, I talk about the food thing. They were up a lot the last night. They were fighting. They go. All they want is their food in the morning. They get called in, and then they split in to several, different sort of wings, as Brian just described. And they came into this field angry, and they made themselves known. So let's think of them, as people, as humans who get hungry and who get tired and thirsty and who care about their loved ones at home. They're not any braver or different than us in a lot of essential ways. So with that, let's tie it up. Thanks to Brian, and to Doug, and to Tim, and to Chris and Shannon behind the camera, and for the little entourage that we seem to have right now. Thank you all for watching. Thanks for remembering Ed Bowers on this day, and thank you for supporting Battlefield Preservation.